What a pleasure to begin today's show with an old friend. Mark Levin, the great one himself, joins me. He's the author of this brand new bestseller on power. Mark, welcome back. I haven't talked to you in a while, and I've got a lot of questions about this, but let me do a wellness check. Everything well in your world?
Let me look. Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you, brother.
You, you look great. I should tell the audience, I've been talking with Mr. Levin since 1984 when he came into the Department of Justice, took over the Attorney General's office as his chief of staff, and made the trains run on time and actually got a lot of stuff done. What he writes about in On Power is exactly what he talked about in 1984. Mark, would you say that you are unchanged in your fundamental beliefs since then?
I am unchanged. Look, you have certain principles, certain belief systems. I think if there's any change, it's sort of on their application, and not that often and so forth. But look, either you're right or wrong about your values, your morals, and your principles. And that's my attitude about it. I've not had to change any of that. Um, in fact, my view is I try to promote it, on every platform I have as much as possible in my writings and on radio and TV and so forth. So my goal is to advance and institute my principles, not to change them.
I believe that you have consistently believed in liberty first, liberty always, and you expand on that in the book On Power. I want to begin with a couple of quotes. Page 15. This book is intended to provoke a better comprehension of what is meant by power. If it succeeds even modestly, perhaps it will provide an additional source for liberty and against tyranny. And on page 177, my focus is on those politicians and academicians who claim to embrace and uphold the Constitution while using it by manipulation and perversion as a means to dismember its most critical parts, especially separation of powers, the consent of the people, and federalism. So there's a positive goal and there's a negative goal, just like you described there being a positive liberty and a negative liberty. Did you intend that symmetry, or did that just come out of your natural flow? Because it's really a wonderfully written book, Mark.
Well, thank you. No, that's intentional. I took this word power, this concept, this force, which is not easily defined, and I broke it down into negative power and positive power, and beyond that, soft negative, soft positive power. And I did that because, Hugh, I started to think about ancient history and our own history, and I realized the revolution wasn't over liberty or rights, it was over power. Who gets to make the decision? And so the fight was over representative government, taxation without representation. And I got to thinking, liberty without rights means nothing, and rights without power mean nothing. And so in the book, I actually quote Stalin's Constitution from 1936. It is a beautiful constitution. He stole a lot from our Bill of Rights, and
Yep.
it's just fantastic. And then the next year, he slaughters about 8 million Ukrainians, and everything that's in that constitution is a lie. Why? Because he has all the power. The people have no power whatsoever. And then, Hugh, I got to thinking about our founding, as I said, and the founding is they were fighting over power. And you go back and you read these men. Sam Adams, as you know, one of the earliest and the most effective revolutionaries up there in Boston, he writes extensively about liberty, and yet he really doesn't talk about liberty. He's talking about power. And then I went back and I started to read Aristotle, who I love, and there's a lot to read. And I said, what does he say about liberty? Well, he talks about liberty, but he defines it in the context of power. And then I go back and I read again our Constitution, which I read all the time. I thought that whole document is about the way power is to be divided, the way power is to be diversified, who has it, who doesn't. And so I said, we focus a lot on this word liberty and this word rights. And then I got to thinking, well, now the Marxists and the Islamists, the left, they focus on power, power, controlling power, centralizing power, destroying the barriers to power, separation of powers, and so forth. So we, you and I, your audience, my audiences, we look at power as something that Montesquieu said, power has to check power. Power must check power. Scalia used to talk about everybody who understands this, the great period of the Enlightenment. And yet the left, the Democrats, who I call them pretty much American Marxists at this point, they're leaders, and the Islamists, They're about eliminating power, checking power. They're consumed with controlling power, centralizing power. It's power for them, it's power over. I say in the book, for us, it's power of language, power of competition, power of separation of power. For them, it's power over. They're not really interested in the competition of power. They try and change the election laws, the voting laws. They continue to want to press to change the Supreme Court so they have power over us. And I discuss these in much more elaborate detail in the book. So yes, negative power, and then positive power. What's positive power? The Constitution is positive power. We needed a central government, but then they divided that government, and then they added a 10th Amendment to ensure and underscore the point that the action is where the states are. The 9th Amendment, which I argue is really reflective of the Declaration of Independence, individual liberty. Just go through our Constitution. It's so completely different than what the left, the Democrats argue for today.
Mark Levin, when I finished this, I was reminded in 1980, Richard Nixon wrote a book called The Real War. And the New York Times reviewed it, and they called it a cri de coeur, a cry from the heart, because he was very concerned about the Soviet Union. He didn't want any more Vietnam, so he was very passionate. On Power is a cri de coeur. It's a very passionate book. It's very deeply researched, by the way. I'm going to come to some stuff from Sam Adams myself, Democracies Do Not Guarantee Liberty. I've never seen that. Never seen that quote before. So my hat is off to your research. But are you worried? Are you anxious over the future of this country to the extent that the American Marxists, and they are many and they are in positions of power, are winning?
It's a great question. I should also mention near the end of the book, I take Hamilton. I take a very close look at Hamilton to the point where the National Constitution Center would like me to talk about this. We can get to that later. People can read about it. Am I concerned? Yes. You know, I had a little discussion with my dear friend, and he is Victor Davis Hanson on Life, Liberty, and Levin. I think it was Saturday. And he and I both agree of all the great things that are occurring during the Trump administration. And the next census, if it's done accurately, the Republicans will pick up House seats. They'll pick up electoral college votes because of that. Depending on how we count illegal aliens, but the people are moving with their feet, and it has a consequence in our system into red or Republican states, which is exactly why the Democrats want to get rid of the Electoral College, and they have a movement underway, the National Vote Initiative, all these other things, and that's my point. To answer your question, I'm very worried because these people don't give up. And Donald Trump won't be president forever. And the fact is, a lot of Republicans who are elected don't comprehend the extent to which these people are in the culture and in the society. Donald Trump really is the first president to go into the culture, into society, not just at the political level, but to go in, whether it's the law firms or the colleges and universities and so forth and so on, to go into these areas and fight them. He's the first one to go into the fourth branch of government, the bureaucracy, and try and literally rearrange it, defang them, move the departments around to some extent, reduce their impact, Department of Education, USAID, we can go through each and every one of them. He's the first to effectively do that. He's the first to really shut down the border, because what's happening here is we don't assimilate anymore. In fact, public schools and colleges and universities and the media don't believe in an Americanism that should be assimilated into, as they constantly attack us. And so what happens is you have these bifurcated cultures that are imported into the United States who demand that we assimilate into their cultures or that we accept their cultures. And that is a massive problem, a destruction of our country, and Trump's put an end to that. And so I see, when you look at Trump and the presidency, an enormous amount of positive things going on. And yet I think people make the big mistake saying, but look at what's happening, Mark. So why are you Mr. Pessimist? I'm not pessimistic. I'm a realist. These people are not going to go away. They're about to elect somebody to the biggest city in America who's a complete reprobate, a malcontent, a communist, an Islamist, a Jew hater. And he's been open about it. And people say, good, now we'll run on that. And I said, what do you mean good? They'll be taking the biggest city in the United States. I look at these things, Hugh, as military battles without the arms. Would Patton say, oh, it's a good thing they took New York and we'll stop them at Arkansas? No. We got to
No,
fight
indeed.
every
Pause right
inch.
there. I will come back with Mark Levin throughout the entire show. This is his book on power. I taped the interview just before the program got live today. Don't go anywhere. He'll be in and out of every hour on today's show, but go get the book on power from Amazon right now. It's available, and it's wonderful. Last night, I'm sitting in my chair waiting to appear with Sean Hannity on a panel with Ari Fleischer, and a big promo comes on. Available all on every platform on Fox, the Ruthless podcast. And I'm in awe because I think the Ruthless podcast has achieved liftoff when they get their own promo for a full half minute on the Sean Hannity show in front of millions of people last night. Joining me now, Josh Holmes of the aforementioned Ruthless podcast. Have you seen that promo, Josh? It's really beautiful.
I have. It was sort of an out-of-body experience. Actually, the week that we signed with Fox, we were walking through one of the big atriums they have with all the news center, incredibly impressive facility in New York, and it was playing in real time as we were walking through it. And I was like, God, I felt like like a high school commit that rolls into the university and has
yes,
it was fantastic.
Welcome to the shoe. You're going to be in the NFL. You're going to get billions of dollars. But it's really nicely done, and they kept the graphics. I'm not quite an OG, but I know where this comes from. And did anyone say to you? Did anyone try and do the Hollywood thing? We love everything, but let us make a few changes.
No, actually, it was quite the opposite. I mean, everybody that we worked with at Fox was basically like, we love what you do. Please don't change anything for it. And that was obviously extremely attractive to us because we've always done what we've done because we love it. Same reason you do. It's like you have this relationship with the audience. They get to know you, and it's an authentic presentation because it's just what we'd be doing at the bar if we weren't doing it in front of microphones. And that's what they wanted. So that's what everybody gets.
Well, everybody's going to love it, and people should watch it, but they should like and subscribe to the Ruthless podcast. Josh, I want to get ahead of your program. I listened to today's podcast, and you didn't cover it. And so I want to ask you what I think you're going to be covering, which is the redistricting wars. The secret sauce in the Ruthless podcast is the guys are pros. They actually know what they're talking about. They came out from behind the curtain to in front of the microphone, and they know what redistricting wars are like. Who's going to win this? Because Texas is going to add 5R. Newsom's going to get it on the ballot. I don't bet against Democrats in California. I lived there for 29 years, so I think he's probably going to win. What's the end result, though, when all the redistricting wars are done?
Well, I mean, it's all about the political courage and to see this all the way through. I mean, if California does what they appear to be doing to try to counteract Texas, they have a hell of a lot. Democrats have a hell of a lot more liability in redistricting wars than Republicans do. I mean, you just take the state of Illinois, where all the people of Texas retreated to. I mean, you look at some of those districts, you could have 3 wood across areas that try to connect one blue area to another just to ensure that you have a Democratic congressperson. And I think that is the case basically throughout. I mean, Democrats historically have been far more aggressive and politically conniving in redistricting their states than Republicans had ever dreamed to be. And they set up these, like, quote unquote, bipartisan commission. But listen, redistricting is a political exercise. It is not something that is some bipartisan commission that you're going to find some whatever. It's a political exercise, and when it's executed to try to provide the best interest of people who elected the people to make these decisions, it largely represents the party in power. Democrats have just taken that to the 9th degree, and my sense is that if this was played all the way out, they would have a real problem on their hands. The only thing I worry about, Hugh, is whether people have the political courage to just really ratchet it up and go all the way through it.
Well, that is what I'm encouraged by, some of the reaction I've seen. Now, you've got one of your Ruthless brothers is from Indiana, and I think they got to go talk to Governor Braun because he is hesitant. Indiana's got it. Ohio's going to do it by law. They have to redistrict. Florida, Danny Perez, the speaker down there, he started it. Kelly Ayotte, the governor of New Hampshire, is a very solid Republican, but she's opposed to it. Nebraska could easily turn the one Democratic seat into a red seat. It could be done. In fact, I think the Republicans could end up net 10 plus if they all played by Chicago rules. Now, I just quoted Chicago rules to Mark Levin. The great Joe Malone, played by Sean Connery. If He brings a knife, you bring a gun. If he sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of yours to the morgue. His to the morgue. Do you think the Republicans will do it?
Nice house, a shame if something happened to it. That film, yeah, that's exactly right, Hugh. Listen, I don't know, and I hope that we're now in a day and age when you can recognize what it is that the liberal left has done. I mean, for so long, Republicans have tried to play largely between the 40s, if you take a football analogy, where they, they'll take some liberties, but you keep it relatively inoffensive. Democrats have never played by those rules. And I think if we're going to get into a full-throated battle over redistricting, you got to go all the way out. And if California is going to come back at Texas, I think it's a green light. And honestly, I think it's kind of a liability to those governors and state lawmakers if they don't pursue it, because you're really letting the conservative movement down. If you give up the House of Representatives simply because you don't have the courage to pursue what your Democratic counterparts across this country are doing, that is a real problem.
That is very well said. I hope you say that on the podcast, on the program. Let me ask you about the wisdom for the benefit of the people of California. An example. My friend Ken Calvert has been a friend for 30 years. He is now the senior appropriator on the House Armed Services Appropriations Subcommittee. So he controls billions and billions and billions of spending. The governor of California wants to take out Ken Calvert. How stupid is that for a state as underwater as California is? Pretty dumb.
I mean, look, somebody who controls that amount of spending, you got an awful lot of levers to work with. But look, I don't think there's anything particularly strategic about Gavin Newsom. I think he's basically just a suit, right? Slick back hair, smooth talker. He'll reverse every position depending upon the audience that he's in front of. I mean, this guy's just trying to get a little further down the road on each and every step. And it doesn't seem to me like there is a grand plan there. This is why this guy, although will be in the conversation for 2028, I think has got a real problem, because his strategic thinking, if you just look back the last 10 years, not particularly impressive in an awful lot of ways. And history.
I got to tell you, Josh, he has accepted an invitation to be on this program, my program, not the program, at least 6 or 7 times. And then he turns me over to a guy named Izzy, and I never hear anything. So I keep emailing him, he keeps saying yes, and he never shows up. He'll never show up. Yeah. I think he's got a glass jaw.
Well, not only that, but I mean, look, not to just sort of toot your horn here, Hugh, but when you come on the Hugh Hewitt show, you got to know your stuff. This guy doesn't know his stuff. He knows how to sort of persuade based on what he thinks it is that you want to hear, and he can be congenial, and it's probably pretty good in small rooms and whatnot. But the grand policy pronouncement that this guy has made over his entire career have been absolutely abjectly terrible. And for a guy like you, if you're coming on your show, you're going to have to defend that kind of stuff. I don't think they want any part of it.
Well, we'll see. We will see. I think you ought to go on your show. If you really want to be president, every Democrat ought to be asking to be on the Ruthless podcast in the way that Speaker Johnson and every other Republican with charm and eloquence and everyone shows up on the Ruthless podcast. And if you are not listening, you're behind. Josh Holmes, thank you for coming on. Follow him on X at Holmes Josh. Follow the Ruthless podcast on X at Ruthless Podcast. But most importantly, go to YouTube. Like and subscribe to the program if you wish to opine.
And one of the things at the table was one of the gentlemen, who's a great guy, but he said, I hope I didn't insult him. He said, well, let's meet in another month or two, and let's see if we can start, making some money. He said, a month or two, you're going to have another 40,000 people dead in a month or two. You have to do it tonight. And I did.
Good for President Trump. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. President Trump called into Fox and Friends this morning and laid out what we all know, which is he's pushing hard to get step 1 done, which is done. He met with Putin. Step 2, get the EU and Zelensky together with him, and that happened. Step 3 is get Zelensky and Putin to meet. Don't know if that's going to happen. If it does, step 4 will be a trilat, a summit between Zelensky, Trump, and Putin. We will see. I was on, as I mentioned to Josh Holmes just now, with Sean Hannity and Ari Fleischer last night on Sean's program on Fox News Channel. I was asked my assessment. Sean wants the president in the next meeting. Ari said no, they should be together. Sean came to me, cut number 10.
Hugh Hewitt. I would prefer, especially in the first meeting, Donald Trump to be in the room. Do you agree with me or you agree with Ari?
I agree with you, and I'll tell you why. If not President Trump, then Secretary Rubio, because I do believe the ill will between President Zelensky and Putin is so immense. 1 million casualties in this war, more than 1 million, Sean. And in 3.5 years, as Prime Minister Maloney said in the clip that you played earlier, nothing has happened because the Oval Office was effectively empty for 3.5 years. And something Senator Graham said. A strong president brings peace. A weak president brings a second invasion, as Ari mentioned, 2 invasions under 2 weak presidents. So I would rather have the strong president on site. But I'd even take what you suggested, Senator Graham or Secretary Rubio, just someone to make sure that it doesn't go south in a hurry, because it could go south in a hurry when they get there. I did note in a Wire report a little bit earlier, the Secretary General of NATO has said that Putin has agreed to meet with Zelensky. So that's another step forward. Again, I'm so impressed with what the president has pulled off in 72 hours. You have to be suffering from TDS not to nod an acknowledgement towards what the president has accomplished. Well, then I watched the press conference today, Carolyn Levitt doing her usual masterful job, and the White House press corps does have TDS. It's like they don't want this to work. They don't want Donald Trump to bring a resolution to the Russia invasion of Ukraine. Well, I got a second bite at the apple last night as well, cut number 11.
Hugh, I agree with everything that Ari just said, and I'll take it a step further. I would argue, and I did argue in my opening monologue, that, in fact, I blame Europe for a lot of these problems. They didn't want to step up. They didn't want to pay their fair share as it relates to NATO. They didn't want to pay for the continent of Europe and its security against Russia. They helped make Russia rich by purchasing all their energy from Russia. That funded Putin's war machine. So I have contempt for most of Europe at this point.
Well, weakness is provocative. Ari has said that. He's absolutely right. Weakness invites a Putin of the world to act like the thug. I want to go back to something you'd mentioned earlier, Sean. Last week, the president broke the ice when he laid those sanctions on India, because the 50% hammer got everything moving, got the entire process going. And if you read the Financial Times today, Peter Navarro had a piece in there about how India has been the dirty middleman for Russia's money. President Trump has understood, go after the money, and Russia gets a lot more willing to deal. And so whether or not there's a land swap, I'm not willing to say that. I think Donald Trump knows what both men have told him, knows where the pressure points are for Putin. He's already put a little bit of thumb on one of those pressure points. There are other Russian purchasers out there that he can go after with tariffs. I think he knows exactly what the plan is, and it's unfolding in real time. It's kind of amazing to watch. It is amazing to watch, and my hat is off to President Trump. My hat is off to Relief Factor, their sponsor of the show, and I need to take my Relief Factor today, largely because I've got a little bit of laryngitis, just a touch. You know what laryngitis is? It's inflammation of the vocal cords. You know what Relief Factor does? It gets rid of inflammation in your body by working with your body's anti-inflammatory system. So I take it every day. Now, it is likely because cold front blew in last night, and I am now, the temperature switch was about 30 degrees. And I was outdoors last night after the Hannity program, talking with the fetching Mrs. Hewitt and the remaining remnants of the family tidal wave that swept in, going out tomorrow, and we'll be back to normal. And we had great joy, but I was shouting at 3-year-olds for 3 weeks, and that will take it out on your voice and the weather change, et cetera. But Relief Factor will help. Helps any kind of inflammation. That's why you ought to try it. 1-800, the number 4 in the word relief, 1-800-4-RELIEF. Everything that bothers you, well, not everything, but most things that bother you, there are minor aches and pains, is just inflammation. So deal with it the old-fashioned way. Use Mother Nature, not over-the-counter. Drugs like Aleve and other NSAIDs. Take Relief Factor. 1-800, the number 4 in the word relief, or go to their website, relieffactor.com. Find their special introductory offer of $19.95 for a 3-week trial pack. That's less than $1 a day. At relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. If you've been listening for years and now watching on the Salem News Channel, you know that we use the music from a television series about Washington, D.C.'s dark side for introducing David Drucker, not because he's part of the dark side of D.C., but because he covers it. And there is no darker art than redistricting. David, The redistricting wars are moving into full gear in Texas and California. I'm hoping it spreads to Ohio and Indiana and Florida and Missouri and New Hampshire and Nebraska. What's the state of play and who's going to win if everyone gets their knives out?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, redistricting on the one hand has become such a finely tuned technological art that even though gerrymandering has existed almost as long as the Republic, and both parties have been a part of it and used it, what technology allows map makers to do with districts is something that they couldn't do 100 years ago. You could probably carve a 4-unit condo, a 4-unit fourplex into 4 different districts.
Hadn't thought about that. You're right.
How good they are at it. So what you're going to see, obviously, is in Texas, now that they are able to get a quorum and Democrats have returned to the state, you'll see a new map there. I have talked to Republicans. Let's start with Texas. Obviously, Republicans are very optimistic there, some of them. But I've talked to other Republicans who worry that if this midterm election is rough for the GOP because there is a Republican in the White House, then it's not going to be the boon in seats that some Republicans imagine. And they even think that more seats than otherwise would have been could be competitive for Democrats. All right, that's Texas. That you could go one of two ways. Then you've got California, which is really the only place where Democrats can realistically respond. And even though Governor Newsom had to get an initiative on the ballot in a special election for this November, because Democrats have a 2/3 majority plus in the legislature, they're going to be able to do that and put sort of an emergency constitutional amendment adjustment on the ballot. And you'll see, upwards of 100 million, maybe on both sides, spent on this. And I've talked to some Republicans that say, listen, people don't like politicians drawing their own lines. They don't like gerrymandering. California, as you know, has an independent commission, even though it doesn't really result in seats existing to the percentages of the electorate. It's still largely a Democratic map. However, I've talked to other Republicans who say this is all going to be about Newsom versus Trump and Democrats versus Trump. And as long as Democrats can get that message across to the voters of California, there are more than enough of them to pass this. In which case, you then have potentially a +5 Democratic map, although a couple of seats would be competitive, and maybe you only end up at +2.
I'm gonna stipulate that it's going to win, David. You and I are ex-Californians, and we know how strong the Democratic Party is, and we know the machine in LA and the machine. So I'm going to stipulate that it wins. Have they had enough time to actually carefully draw the 4-unit condo, which I think I'm going to steal from you? Can they, or they have rushed this? They have not done, I mean, they might have fed it into grok or something, but do you think they've had enough time to do it well?
Well, I think that they have had enough. I think we don't know for sure, but theoretically they have. I will say that they took about as much time as Texas took. I mean, look, getting back to the Texas idea for a minute, this was a creation of the White House that bypassed the National Republican Congressional Committee, the NRCC, bypassed the Texas Republican Congressional Delegation, went straight to Governor Abbott in the legislature. None of them were comfortable with it, but when President Trump asked Republicans to jump, people just tend to say how high. And so they found a good map maker, not necessarily their first choice, but a very good map maker. He moved quickly and drew the maps rather quickly. The Democrats in California, and there was a good article in Politico, who I have to credit here, on Paul Mitchell, who was their map maker, who was supposed to be some sort of map making, map drawing and data savant, who I have heard of and I have talked to in the past, although not recently, got to work quickly for them. So I think all things being equal here, the maps are the maps. And then the question is, Ohio, I think you put aside because the law in Ohio already called for a change in the map before the next census. Can they squeeze another seat out of Indiana or Missouri or both? Possibly. New Hampshire, I would take off the table. Kelly Ayotte, the new governor there, like her predecessor, Chris Sununu, isn't interested in messing with redistricting in too partisan a fashion. And that's probably why Chris Sununu won 4 elections in a row. They served 2-year terms there. So I think this really is about Texas versus California. Maybe Republicans get an extra seat or two somewhere else. But again,
Danny
it's
Perez
also
in
about
Florida,
the
if I
political.
interrupt you, Speaker Perez in Florida has a sort of a deficit with Trump people. He can make that deficit up statewide, thinking statewide down the line, if he puts through a new map that adds Republicans. And there's opportunity in Florida. What do you think?
Well, there could be. I think the question is, and it's funny. I interviewed Speaker Perez earlier this year for a story that I was down in Tallahassee reporting. It depends on whether he cares about anything beyond his current post. A lot of Republicans I've talked to in Florida tell me he doesn't care, and that he sort of has this old-fashioned notion that I'm the Speaker of the House. It's this my branch of government, and you do your thing, I'm going to do mine. Doesn't mean pressure can't be brought to bear by his colleagues, but I think that's a. I think look at this as a maybe, but don't look at necessarily Perez as thinking there's something he wants to gain out of this. Although, things could have changed since the last time I talked to him.
I want to ask you about Nebraska with less than a minute. I will add this about Perez, though. He's one of the most gifted political actors I've ever interviewed, and I've interviewed him probably a half dozen times. He sparkles. He just has the juice. What about Nebraska? Not only ought they to redistrict the Don Bacon seat, they ought to change the state so that the Democrats don't get an electoral vote when it's an overwhelmingly Republican state. Will they do it?
Well, yeah, if they do that, though, Maine will follow suit, and there are enough Democrats in Maine to do that. Right, but it doesn't change the calculus, is my point. So it's interesting, but it doesn't really change the playing field.
So, end of the day, we wake up on the morning of November X, 2026. Who's running the House?
It's all about the atmospherics. Listen, Republicans have a very thin majority, so Democrats have the upper hand. On the other hand, there are fewer competitive seats than there used to be. And, we saw 2022 look like it should be a strong Democratic year, a strong Republican year, and it was not so strong. So let's see where we are a year from now.
Yeah, I've been a pessimist for the Republicans because I am a Republican for a long time. I'm starting to change because Trump's off to such a great start. David M. Drucker, thank you for joining me. Follow him on X at David M. Drucker. He is with the Dispatch. He's a remarkable guy. He knows this stuff cold. I'm looking for an email my friend Andrew Del Rey sent me 2 days ago. Andrew Del Rey is part of andrewandtodd.com, 888-888-1172, sponsors of the program. Andrewandtodd.com are lenders. They are mortgage lenders. They help you buy a house, and they help you refinance a house. And you can call them at 888-888-1172, 888-888-1172, or you can go to their website, andrewandtodd.com. Here it is. Refinancing has soared in the last month. Last week, refinancing made up 46% of the mortgage loan applications in the country. Why are people refinancing? Some people simply have too much debt. And they have done the math. It's just a question of doing the math. They might have one of those wonderful 3% 30-year loans, but they also might have $50,000, $100,000 in credit card debt. And since they got that wonderful loan, their house has increased dramatically in value, as has been happening all over the United States. And they've done the math. It saves them money to refinance at 6% or 6.25%, or maybe even in the high fives, and give up the 2 points over 30 years, but get rid of the $100,000 in debt, which their credit card is charging them 20+% for. Now, you say, well, there aren't that many people out there like that. Well, yes, there are. There are a lot of people with student loan debt, a lot of people with credit card debt, a lot of people bought houses that they could not, not houses, cars that they could not afford in the splurge during the post-COVID years when things opened up. A lot of people make financial mistakes. When you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. You fix it. Who do you work with to fix it? andrewandtodd.com. Why? Because they are a wise and good counsel. They will not give you bad advice. They will give you good, solid advice on what to do with the biggest asset you own, your home. And they will not steer you wrong. So give them a call and talk to them. 888-888-1172. Especially if you're thinking, I'm drowning in debt. I'm paying too many credit cards. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do with this house? It's wonderful. I've got a 3% mortgage. I can't possibly refinance. If you can't do the math, then ask them to do the math. They will not tell you to refinance unless it makes sense for you. So give them a call, 888-888-1172. Consumer Cellular is my other sponsor that I want to tell you about. 1-800-411-4454. 1-800-411-4454. and I want to talk directly to people who are 50 years and older. There's a special at Consumer Cellular for you if you're 50 and older. 2 lines, unlimited data for $60 a month. That's 2 unlimited lines for $60 a month, $30 each line. Don't forget you get $25 off if you use the promo code Hugh25. Have savings, that's $5 off each of the next 5 invoices that you get. But if you're 50 and older, call them today. 1-800-411-4454 or go to consumercellular.com/Hugh. But in either case, use the promo code Hugh25 for $5 off each of the next 5 months. Again, the phone number, 1-800-411-4454. Especially if you're 50 and older and you use a lot of data, call them. Call them today, 1-800-411-4454. Just before the program began to air this day, I sat down with an old colleague and friend, Mark Levin, to talk about his brand new book, On Power. We spent a half hour. I'll play it out over 3 hours so that the entire audience gets to hear portions of the great one talking about On Power. Here is part 2.
We got to fight every inch of this thing. And so I see this thing rising. I see in the Democrat Party an acceptance of this ideology, an embrace of this ideology. Even the so-called opponents are afraid to speak out. At best, they're neutral. Well, you can't be neutral when you're facing this. And honestly, Hugh, I see within our own party, less so in our party because some of these people are broken off, some level of this too, some level of attacking Judaism, attacking evangelical Christians, attacking American history. And many of these people claim to be American firsters. They're not American firsters. We've seen this kind around in the 1930s too, as well. So I see a lot of positive right now with Donald Trump as president, but I also want people to forbear and realize these other people are not going away, and we have to address this and confront it.
You know, one of the great advantages of having Donald Trump as president, and I was not a big fan of Trump in 2015, 2016, but I'm growing to like him more, is he's adopted the Sean Connery admonition when he played Joe Malone in the Untouchable Chicago Rules. He brings a knife, you bring a gun. He puts one of yours in the hospital, you put one of his in the morgue. We're doing that in Texas with redistricting. So Gavin Newsom's going to try and amend the California Constitution, which is fine. It's politics. But then we've got to play the same way. Positive power. We've got to use the red states, of which there are many more than the blue states, to redistrict just as aggressively as the Democrats do, because that's positive power when you redistrict in the benefit of your party. You agree or disagree with that, Mark?
A great point. I discuss in the book where positive power can be abused by those who exercise negative power. They use it for a period of time and then they destroy it. And I go on to say, we've not really been able to figure out as human beings, and we never will, how we overcome this idea. Liberty is a great thing, but it also gives room for very evil people and movements to develop, to abuse and exploit liberty towards the opposite of liberty, to different ends, tyrannical ends, totalitarian ends, that sort of thing. But negative power, I say from time to time, like at times you have to centralize power and so forth. That's necessary too. And then I kind of do a mind debate with myself, but is that really negative power when it's used that way? And the answer to me is no. But it comes to us as negative power. So I try to develop these things. The book is very cerebral, but on the other hand, very understandable, which is why it took me so long to write it. And I also decided to keep it tight because I could have written 1,000 pages on this. I thought that would be foolish because nobody will use it. You know, they'll use it as a doorstop or something like that. But I want people not just to buy the book, I want them to read the book, because my hope here is that we better understand the enemy, that they are about grabbing power.
I want to make sure the audience understands one of the most important revelations of Mark's book On Power is that we have come via hard-earned experience to learn there is no ruling class. There are people who think they're in the ruling class. There are people who claim expertise. But in point of fact, you write, We know that incompetence and corruption are widespread and practical experience and common sense are in short supply on page 136. COVID taught us that. Joe Biden's administration, he was not really the president. I think you would agree with me on that. The office was empty for 3 years. His team, his shadowy force majeure behind him, they were not expert at anything. There just isn't anything about which we ought to defer to other than our common citizenry, Mark. Is that one of your key points?
Yeah, it's a very important point because the early American Marxists who assigned a nomenclature to themselves, very clever that they're progressives, but they really the progeny of Marx and so forth. And I wrote a different book on that called American Marxism, but they've customized and tailored Marxism to a Western ideal or to American ideal. They used to write at great length, they still do, that you need this highly educated expert class, this elite class, and they didn't mean it in a pejorative way, they meant it as an important way, to help organize or reorganize society. And I said, well, where is this? The federal bureaucracy is filled with knuckleheads, some of them filled with some smart people and so forth. To become a member of the federal bureaucracy, you don't have to be particularly intelligent or profound or accomplished, quite the contrary. It's filled with dead weight. So even their own ideological point is false. Where are all these experts and all these wise people and all that? What are their names? Who are they? They don't exist. As a matter of fact, what they do is they regulate the experts and the wise people and so forth that are in the private sector and have actually experienced and have done different things. But I want to get back to a point you raised, the American founding. I think what's crucial to understand, and I start this in the book, is we believe in the power of the sovereign. Now, who's the sovereign? America was founded on the Judeo-Christian value and belief system. That doesn't mean everybody has to be Jewish or Christian or anything. That's the history of the nation. And that meant that God is sovereign. And on earth, his children, when it comes to governance, they are sovereign. That's how each individual is sovereign. And the civil society, the people in the civil society are sovereign. This wasn't just somebody wrote about it and suddenly, no, that is the history of two of the greatest faiths on the face of the earth, Judaism and Christianity. Read the Declaration of Independence, unalienable rights, natural law, natural rights. That doesn't come from man. So they believed in that. But what else did they do? They said, well, how does it manifest itself? This is great to believe these things, but we're trying to set up a government. They fused that with the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment and the Judeo-Christian value system is the basis of the American founding. What's the key thing they learned out of the Enlightenment? There was a lot. But it was what Locke talked about in a more ambiguous way, and he was the most important philosopher during the Revolution. And it's what Montesquieu wrote about during the constitutional period, which is why he's quoted in the Federalist Papers. Power checking power. And he broke it down into three branches. He broke it down into specific ways that nobody had done before, even though even Aristotle and others talked about power checking power. Legislative, judicial, executive, we all know about that. And this is how they came up with the Declaration early on. This is how they came up with the governing document that they did. This is why they're so important. And this is why the left came up with the 1619 Project and CRT, and that the Constitution was written by white slave owners. This is why they're constantly talking about centralized government programs, whether it's healthcare or anything else. Bureaucracy, centralized government, it doesn't work. They don't care that it doesn't work. They want to rejigger society, rejigger humankind, top down, not bottom up. So it's very important to understand this, because Marxism and Islamism are completely incompatible with Americanism. They are a completely different belief system, because in the case of Marxism, it's coercion. It's not coercion plus, it's coercion. In the case of Islam, it's religion fused with coercion. That's not the way America was founded.
No, it was. And
Let's pause right there.
As
We'll
you
come
see on
back.
page 140. Part 3 and 4 coming up. The entire interview is already posted at YouTube on my YouTube channel, which I would encourage you to go and check out. Hugh Hewitt, YouTube. I'd really appreciate it if you like and subscribe there as well, as it helps spread messages like Mark's and my other guests widely. The algorithm takes note. Let's just say that. And I expect all of the Levin boosters out there will enjoy the entire interview uninterrupted, though if you're listening to the entire show today, you'll hear that. Let me tell you about one of our sponsors. Mark and I are both in the business of broadcasting. The business of broadcasting requires sponsors, great sponsors like WebRoot. WebRoot.com/Hewitt. Hugh, sometimes it's Hugh, sometimes it's Hewitt. WebRoot.com/Hewitt. WebRoot.com/Hewitt. You've heard me talk about many, many news stories of identity theft. You've heard me tell you that everybody is at risk from phishing. Everybody is at risk from the deep dark web and the people who are information brokers. I spent a couple of segments with Jason Chaffetz on his new book, They're Coming In For You, yesterday about the number of people who steal data, how often it happens. WebRoot Total Protection or WebRoot Essentials will protect you. You'll get a network monitor, a firewall, real-time antivirus protection against malware, ransomware, and a prevention for the phishing schemes that otherwise come in. And right now, to get you into the program, they're offering half off, 50% off WebRoot Total Protection or WebRoot Essentials when you go to webroot.com/Hewitt. Get 50% off WebRoot Total Protection or WebRoot Essentials today at webroot.com/essentials. You'll be glad you did, and you'll never know how much trouble you saved yourself. Identity theft occurs every 1 to 2 seconds in the United States. webroot.com/Hewitt. Honored to have Rich Lowry, editor of National Review, usually the host of The Editors, but he did a Wally Pip again this week. He let Jack Butler sit in for him again. And he's usually the anchor of the McCarthy Report. And I'm really hoping you've got a McCarthy Report coming up, Rich, because you got to ask him about how he felt when the Guardians swept the Mets last week.
There are a lot of things I'm wondering how Andy feels about and how he's thinking about it, but that's not one of them. We know he's chagrined and disappointed.
Put that at the top of it. Now, I am holding in my hand a list of the Major League Baseball wild card standing, and the Guards are 3 games behind the Yankees, the Red Sox, and the Mariners, all of whom are tied at 5-4, and the Yankees have been on a hot streak, 7-3. I guess we're in competition here. Guardians are getting pretty hot, too.
You're never out of the playoff race if you're around 500. And the Yankees have gotten hot, yeah, but it's because the schedule has softened, and they have huge 4-game series coming up against the Red Sox here later this week.
Well, I want it to go 2-2. That's my prediction. Let me turn to the real issue. This is the 4th time today I will have quoted the legendary Joe Malone, played by Sean Connery in The Untouchables. The Chicago rules, the Chicago way. If he brings a knife, you bring a gun. If he sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue. Redistricting. What will the Republicans do after Texas and California redistrict? And they will. California will pass that. I'm betting that it will pass. Will the Republicans in Missouri, in Florida, in Ohio, in Indiana, in New Hampshire respond in kind?
Yes. I don't know whether all those states will, but some will. And I think net, when all is said and done, Republicans will have gained more than Democrats here, just because there's more juice still to be squeezed in these Republican states. The fact is, despite all the hue and cry about gerrymandering, I mean, Illinois and California are already significantly gerrymandered, right? Republicans get about 40%, a little bit more in Illinois, the popular vote in congressional races there, and get 17% of the seats. So maybe you can knock them down a little further, but after that, it gets real hard, where there are other Republican states where you can squeeze more Republican seats out. So I don't like the mid-decade fight, but this is where we are, and I think Republicans are going to benefit some from it.
I have overcome my distaste for it, Rich, only because politics has become bare-knuckled, and Mamdani is running in New York and the crazy ballot systems in Maine and New York and Alaska ranked choice, all these different and diffuse ways of making voting difficult or available. We have to play hardball. Everybody's got to play hardball. And by the way, I think our framers would have been comfortable with it. You know, Lincoln, you wrote a great book about Lincoln. Lincoln played hardball. He brought the soldiers home to vote, didn't he?
Yeah, Lincoln was a partisan. He was a partisan Whig before the Republican Party, and then was a partisan Republican. Now, of course, elevated by a truly inspiring and historic statesmanship. and when push came to shove. But otherwise, if you told him not to sport a wig when he was a Whig, he'd think you're crazy. The same thing with the Republican once the GOP was formed.
So, will the Republicans, who are traditionally Queensberry rules kind of partisans, they don't like to get down into the trenches. Do you think the party is being changed by Donald Trump with regard to at least playing to win every round?
Yeah, I think it's taking on some of his spirit in this respect, and then also responding to what he wants, right? This wouldn't be happening in Texas if the White House hadn't pushed it. And again, I'm not a huge fan of it, but it can't be that the rule is Texas can't gerrymander itself the way Illinois and California have. So if this Texas map goes through, which I expect it to, it's obviously going to pass the legislature and will probably pass judicial muster as well. Then the ratio I just mentioned of popular vote to seats, that's what Democrats will get in Texas, the same as Republicans get in Illinois and California. So there's either one set of rules for everyone or there isn't.
Now, the mystery that we won't know until November 2026 is the data any good in a time of realignment? And I'm thinking particularly after the leftward lurch of the Democrats, do you think, even places like California, they suffered these terrible fires, the obvious incompetence of the Democrat uniparty there is manifest everywhere. Do you think it might, that their lines might be more difficult to draw than, say, in a red state where people are going to be moving more red, not more blue?
Yeah, it could be. But the thing is, Hugh, the irony here is as you squeeze more seats for your own party out of your maps, the maps get narrow, the districts get narrower, right? And you got to assume that everything kind of works out the way it did last time, and it usually doesn't. Demographics change, politics changes. So maybe, I don't know which state it's going to be, I don't know which party it's going to be, but there will be surprises here. There'll be someone who thinks they're doing a real clever gerrymander that maximizes the number of congressional seats, and then on election night's going to wake up and say, whoops, we cut that one too close.
Is there any room for taking into consideration, like California is going to take aim at a friend of mine for 30 years, Ken Calvert. Ken Calvert is the chairman of the Subcommittee of Defense Appropriations, one of the most powerful members in the House of Representatives who can steer tens of billions of dollars towards California and its emerging industry. Does it make any sense for California to kill his seat? Because they're going to with this new map.
I think they just want to net 5 seats no matter what. It doesn't matter what the other consideration is. One, just with an eye to the midterms. 2, with an eye to Gavin Newsom's very evident political presidential ambitions in 2028. But let me ask you, Hugh, so you're certain that California is going to get this done? Because at least one of the initial polls was kind of encouraging that they have an uphill climb because this independent commission, which isn't so independent, I don't need to tell you, in theory is pretty popular with people, that they're going to bypass here.
I left 8 years ago, so I'm not up to date totally with everything. It's been 9 years now. The machine is so enormous. The SEIU, they tell teachers unions, the tribes, the amount of money that they will not put it forward as a straightforward proposition. Let's redistrict for the benefit of Democrats. They'll word it, and they'll turn out. I will fight it because I want Calvert and other people to have a fair shot at keeping their districts, but I'm not underestimating the power of the Democrats. Sort of like power of Democrats in New York. Would you, if New York had one more district to get, they would get it, wouldn't they?
They would if the courts didn't block them. Yeah, they would. No doubt about it.
There is a chance that there's a constitutional argument to be made that they cannot do this given the state constitution. It's a long shot. I'm sure someone will bring that suit. Let me switch to the big issue. Is it good, in the highest sense of the good, that politics descends to this level of bickering so that the House, in my view, stays in responsible hands? Because I think the Democrats have lost their minds. They've gone off the left edge.
Yeah, they have lost their minds. Again, I would prefer that you do it on a regular schedule with the new census. Now, the census was desperately flawed in 2020, which is just a scandal, right? This is a core federal responsibility right there in the Constitution. If there's anything the federal government should do and be able to do besides just defending us for our foreign enemies, it's count the number of people in the country. And they messed it up. And they messed it up in a way that happened just to discriminate against every single red state and help every blue state, with one or two exceptions in there. So there is an element of justice here where you're at least getting a couple of seats back that you should have had anyway. But I prefer a regular schedule. So then, 6-8 years after you've drawn them, things change, and it's not just trying to advantage yourself right before an election.
Dominic Pino gave a great tutorial on that in a recent edition of The Editors, which is why you should like and subscribe that podcast. Rich is usually setting in, but he's doing the Wally Pipp thing. Jack Butler was pretty good this week. Rich Lowry, follow him on X at Rich Lowry. Thank you. Donald Trump called Fox and Friends this morning. The president wanted to follow up on his big meetings at the White House yesterday. Cut number 1.
How can we ensure that this conflict, that Putin doesn't inch in closer or more into the Ukraine territory? Is there anything that we can do? Can our congressmen and women pass any laws that would involve Article 5? How would that be handled?
All you can do is make sure you get a good president, not one of these wackos like in California that that runs the worst state anybody's seen, or that guy in Illinois who his family threw him out of the business because he was no good. Now he's running Illinois and he wants to run for president. He's got zero chance. Maybe Newsom has a little bit of a chance. I don't know, but it's hard to believe because his record's bad. But all you can do is hope you don't get that as president. We have a great bench, as you know that. We have great talent. And J.D. and Marco and Scott Bessen's been great, and Howard. They're all, we have such superstars.
Yeah, but let's keep going with what became the most controversial, or at least most attention paid to it, of any of the comments the president made to Fox and Friends this morning. Cut number 2.
We had a very good call, and I told him that we're going to set up a meeting with President Zelensky, and you and he will meet, and then after that meeting, if everything works out, okay, I'll meet and we'll wrap it up. But, it takes, in this case, 2 to tango. They have to have somewhat of a relationship. Otherwise, we're just wasting a lot of time. I don't want to be doing that I just want to end it. I want to end it. We're not losing American lives. We're not losing American soldiers. We're losing Russian and Ukrainian, mostly soldiers, some people as missiles hit wrong spots or get lobbed into cities like Kiev and towns. But, if I can save 7,000 people a week from being killed, I think that's I want to try and get to heaven if possible. I'm hearing I'm not doing well. I hear I'm really at the bottom of the totem pole. But if I can get to heaven, this will be one of the reasons.
Yeah, I don't think he's at the bottom of the totem pole, because people at the bottom of the totem pole don't talk about heaven. And they might still get there. He is a product of Collegiate Marble Church, I believe, in New York, Norman Vincent Peale. So he got the basic gospel down. I'm optimistic for everyone. I'm one of those people that believe in horseshoes in heaven. Close is good enough. I want to now tell you about the market, which was not good for anyone today. So sit down. It was a bad day if you're a tech-heavy investor. But again, August false flags all the time. Nobody's there. Nobody's paying attention. Nobody's trading big stuff. This is brought to you by AmericanFederal.com. All right, my friends at American Federal buy and sell gold. 800-221-7694. 1-800-221-7694. You want to buy gold today? Do it with Nick Rovich and his team at AmericanFederal.com. If you want to sell gold today because you're in a jam, or you just want to take profits off the table, because gold is at $3,359 an ounce today, down about $15. But the market was much worse if you were in tech-heavy NASDAQ, which is off 1.5% today, 1.46% to be specific. The broad market, the S&P, was down 0.59, but interestingly enough, the Dow, the bigs, was up 0.02%. Again, August is not the time to make investment plans, but it might be the time to buy gold. And if you want to figure out a plan for how and when to buy gold, call Nick and say, okay, here's my life. Here's how much money I have. How much do you think I ought to diversify? He's not a gold bug. He's not one of those people that say, well, you should put all your money into gold. I don't even think he'll tell you to put more than 10% of your wealth into gold. Your wealth includes your house, of course, and your cash and your stocks and your bonds and your future income that you're aware of and you can count on. Some of that ought to be in precious metals. The percentage is up to you, of course, and I don't give financial advice, but how to buy gold and when to buy gold is Nick Rovich's specialty. And you can call AmericanFederal.com at 800-221-7694. 800-221-7694. I'm in the Relief Factor studio, ReliefFactor.com. When you go to that website, find the starter pack, $19.95, less than $1 a day, to feel better every single day. Why? Because it's a natural set of anti-inflammatory supplements. The only supplement I've taken for more than 20 years, the only one I ever intend to take because I've been blessed with good health. And the one thing that happens occasionally, aches and pains, because I get older and I work out. I run, I trundle. I can't say running anymore because it's not below 10 minutes a mile. But if you call 1-800, the number 4 and the word relief, ask for the special starter pack, $19.95 for a 3-week supply. You take 3 every day for the first week, 2 every day for the second week, 1 every day thereafter. You'll get better. You'll feel better. The minor aches and pains that nag at you after you exercise or you commute, they'll be gone. Or go to ReliefFactor.com. Find the starter pack there at ReliefFactor.com. Great sponsor of the show. I take it every day. I remind you every hour. At this very hour, the California legislature is rushing through a proposed amendment to the state constitution to undo the progressive reform of many years ago, establishing an independent state commission, which is an independent, it's run by Democrats, to do the maps for congressional districts. They're doing it because Gavin Newsom is running for president and he wants to be in the center of the stage. My question is, at the end of the day, who's going to come out on top? I'm joined by Byron York, Fox News contributor extraordinaire, chief political writer for the Washington Examiner, and extraordinarily observant political savant. Byron, who's going to win the redistricting wars?
You know, just to talk about one detail before we get to that, isn't it right that the plan is to do this redistricting that will only apply to 2026, 2028, and 2030, and then snap back to the independent commission thing? Because the voters have actually approved it twice in California, and there's no evidence that they want to throw out this independent body for doing this. But they just want to do it and get them through 2030.
I did not know that, Byron. I wouldn't be surprised because they have sold this. They've sold the Independent Commission hard and long as being progressive. Now they're undoing their progressive. It'd be like undoing Obamacare for 6 years.
Yeah, it's like saying, these are our progressive values, but we're going to have to put them on the shelf for a few years while we deal with the threat, the singular threat of Donald Trump, who presents a threat to our entire democracy. And then we'll become democratic again after the 2030 census.
But it's going to, I've told everyone my assessment. I lived in California for 27 years, and actually 29 if you take my first 2 years out there. The machine is so big and so vast. What they put on the ballot in all likelihood will pass, no matter how bad it is for the state. It will be very, very bad for the state, Byron. For example, they're going to try and take out Ken Calvert. He's the chairman of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. That will greatly injure the state of California, but they don't care.
Another thing I was going to point out about this that's kind of fascinating, if you just take the California and the Texas examples, and California is losing population.
Yep.
And Texas is gaining population. And I believe one of the arguments for the Texas redistricting is that by this point, halfway through the decade of the 2020s, Texas has gained enough population for, I think, 4 seats, certainly 3 seats. So they're going to pick up seats in 2030, and they're making this argument, which is kind of interesting, although it's not in the Constitution, that, when states' population changes so dramatically, so quickly, maybe they shouldn't have to wait until the next decennial census before they change something. But
the best argument for this,
dealing with a shrinking pie.
Yeah. The best argument for doing this right now is that the census of 2020 was a mess and it screwed Texas. And so they're going to try and right the wrong. And that argument was made by, among others, Rich Lowry. The best case against doing redistricting, it's late Roman Republic stuff. Everyone's always upping the ante. First, Harry Reid broke the filibuster. Then Mitch McConnell broke the filibuster for the Supreme Court. And on it goes because you got to match brass knuckle. I've quoted Joe Malone 5 times today from the untouchables. If he brings a knife, you bring a gun. If he sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of yours to his to the morgue. And I think that's where we're headed. And I'm not unhappy with that, Byron. I think the stakes are sufficiently high. Republicans have to play to win. What do you think?
Well, I think looking at the midterms of 2026, I think if we look at it historically, you would bet that the Republican Party is going to lose control of the House.
Yes.
I mean, after all, they've got the tiniest majority ever, so they're going to lose control of the House. And then the first thing the Democratic majority will do is impeach the president because they think maybe it'll work this time for the third time, and third time's a charm. And that will, in any event, whatever legislative agenda the president might have would be out the window. It's all over at that point if Democrats win. So that is, I think, the subtext of everything that's going on right now, which is that the Democratic Party, one of the reasons they are lost is because they don't control the House, they don't control the Senate, and they don't control the White House. And a party that's completely out of power in Washington has no leader and no direction. And that's where they are now. And the quickest way they can get it is to win the House and impeach Trump.
And the subtext of the subtext, Byron, impeachment makes money. They raise a lot of money on impeachment. Jeremy Raskin, nobody knew who he was. It makes money. They have an incentive to do it. But at the end of the day, if everyone gets their guns out, if everyone draws their swords, who wins? I think the Republicans do.
You mean in an impeachment?
No, in terms of redistricting the number of seats.
Oh, well, I think it's been pointed out a lot that the Democrats have kind of squeezed as much juice as they can out of the redistricting lemon, and Republicans haven't. And so it's a bad idea to start this arms race for the Democrats because the Republicans just have more ammunition than the Democrats did, because the Democrats have already fired most of their ammunition. They can pick up a seat here and there. Maybe they'll do it in California. And I agree with your assessment that the institutional powers behind it in a one-party state are really, really strong. So what can I say? I think this is really about stopping Trump and either stopping him cold just legislatively or actually trying to remove him from office.
You know, it's interesting, Byron, and I'm going to talk with you in the break about this. It's too late. He got everything he wanted legislatively. It's really, the tax cuts are permanent. The debt relief is done. The debt limit is raised. What are they stopping?
Well, that's a good point. Obviously, the president will still have his executive authority, and we've seen presidents who've lost support or gotten in big trouble and whatever be kind of reduced their executive authority. But as we've seen with Trump, his executive authority is pretty extensive. His reading of it is extensive, and the courts have basically agreed with him. So, and the cases in which they've disagreed with him have been fewer than the ones they've agreed with him. So, Trump is going to have a lot of authority, even if he loses control of the House, in part also because it looks like he will retain control of the Senate, which means he can continue to get people confirmed if there were another Supreme Court vacancy. He's already done.
And he is establishing the precedent that he can fire all the administrative agency heads he wants and replace them with Republicans. I'm back with Byron York because I'd like to know what he thinks of the state of the census operation right now. You know, President Trump attempted to add a question to the census in his first term. It was struck down by the Supreme Court as being inartfully done and contrary to, I believe, the Administrative Procedures Act. Do you think he's got smart people in charge of the census this time? So it was really a botched deal in 2020 because of COVID. It's got to be fixed.
I think he does. I mean, one of the things the president wants to do is to find out how many people are in the United States illegally. And, you know, that has been a subject in which people threw around commonly accepted estimates for years. It used to be 7 million and 11 million. Who knows what it is now, 15, 20, something.
I think it's above 20,
bigger.
but nobody knows. I think it's above 20, but nobody knows.
Yeah, nobody knows. But we know that it's a lot bigger after Joe Biden's presidency.
Exactly.
And also, we know that you've heard arguments made that that should matter in the apportioning of congressional seats. although the Constitution does not say citizens, it says people.
It's people. Yeah.
People, yeah. So I don't think it's a very strong argument. But it would still be useful to know how many people are in the United States illegally. It might turn out to be an even bigger problem than people think.
And it might figure into the appropriation of money by Congress. So I just wanted to know if you've observed competence infusing the Commerce Department's census effort, and you're satisfied it is competent?
Well, I think almost everything in this administration is better than it was in the first administration. And for this reason, so much of the first administration, and during so much of the first administration, there were people, sometimes in very significant positions, who were trying to undermine the president. And it made for a terrible experience for Trump, and it wasn't good for governing either. So I think we're in a better situation than we were then.
Excellent news. Byron York, thank you. Follow him on X at Byron York, B-Y-R-O-N, York, and see him on Fox News as well. Thank you, Byron.
Thank you, Hugh.
I want to get the longest excerpt I can from President Trump calling into Fox and Friends this morning. This is a 3-minute cut that I want you to hear about the EU leaders and their conversation with President Trump yesterday, cut number 4.
What did the other leaders tell you? Because it seemed to be, this is unlike the first Trump term. There was great unity that was there, and we saw their public comments. But when you got them in the Oval Office, and we have this photo of you sitting at the Resolute desk, and all of these world leaders are sitting in front of you. What did they say to you privately? Because it looks like they're on the same page as you, sir.
Yeah, they are. They're very good people. They're very good leaders of their countries, and they want to get back to leading their country. You know, they're consumed far more with this than we are because they're right there. You know, we have an ocean that's separating us, right? Thing called an ocean, a big, beautiful ocean. And they don't, you know, they're right there. So they have to, you know, that's a different kind of a thing for them. When it comes to security, they're willing to put people on the ground. We're willing to help them with things, especially probably if you could talk about by air, because nobody has the kind of stuff we have. Really, they don't have. But I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think if a deal is made, you know, famous last words, right? But I think if a deal is made, I think Russia's had it. They've all had it. And for a very extended period of time, I don't think there'll be a problem. But there'll be some form of security. It can't be NATO because that's just not something that would ever happen. They couldn't do that. So who would want that? I mean, if you were Russia, who would want to have your enemy, your opponent, sitting on your line? You don't do that. So it was always thought that Ukraine was sort of a buffer between Russia and the rest of Europe. And it was a big, wide buffer. Everything worked out well until Biden got involved. You know, when Biden gave them $100 billion right up front, I don't give them anything. You know, I don't know if you know it, but since I've been there, we don't pay. First of all, I made a deal to take rare earth. That's the equivalent of much more than the $350 billion that Biden got away, because I felt so foolish. It was so stupid what he did. And I was able to make a deal with Ukraine, and they were very nice. They have great rare earth, among the best in the world. And we took much more than the $350 billion, and they were great about it. So we got that, handled. But now we don't pay any money to Ukraine. They buy through NATO, because I got NATO to go from 2% to 5%, 2% when they didn't pay, 2% of GDP, 2% when they didn't pay, and 5% now they do pay. So it's trillions of dollars. So what we do is we make the equipment, the military equipment, and sell it at a full price. We sell it to the NATO. We sell it to NATO, and NATO pays us immediately. And that's the way it's working. And then NATO takes it and does what they want with it, because they really have the right to do what they want with it. But for the most part, they give it to Ukraine.
So President Trump,
so we're not losing. We're not like we were with Biden, where we're paying hundreds of billions of dollars out. We're paying nothing.
It's unprecedented in so many ways, this presidency. It's just great fun being on the air every day and walking along with you through the Trump second term when everything is so much better. Congressman Pat Harrigan, he represents the 10th District in North Carolina. He is a freshman. I think it's the first time I've talked to you since you won, Congressman. Welcome. How's it going? I know you're on armed services, but I always have a freshman on often in their first 2 years. Last 2 years it was Juan Ciscomani to find out what a freshman's perspective is. How are you enjoying it? Up, we've got you on mute.
I like it a lot more than. Go ahead.
No, we're good. Go ahead.
Okay, I like it a lot more than I thought that I would, honestly. And I think that that has a lot to do with what we've been able to accomplish in such a short period of time and being a member of the team that has brought the 119th Congress through a reconciliation process that covers 11 different committees of jurisdiction in a 6-month period of time. I mean, truly delivering on President Trump's promise and the promises that we made out on the campaign trail for the American people, and doing that in such a short period of time. It's really been truly a pleasure to be a part of that.
You know, I did not think it would get done. At least I was hoping, I was praying, but I did not think it would get done. Are you surprised, given the narrowness of the majority, that Speaker Johnson was able to get that through?
No, I'm not. I know a lot of people looked at the process and said, what's going on? Why is this taking so long? The way that I kind of described it is it's like watching a duck swim on the water. If you look at the surface, the duck is calm, cool, and collected, has a lot of poise. But if you look underneath, it's paddling its little flippers like crazy. And that's what was going on behind the scenes. And Speaker Johnson was leading that charge. He's a man of deep faith and incredible patience. And I think he was probably the only person with the personality that could have actually navigated a 3-seat majority. But I had faith that he was going to be able to do it, and that we were all going to be able to stick together and get it done. And that's exactly what happened.
So, Congressman Harrigan, before I turn to armed services, I want to ask you about the redistricting wars. Texas is going to redistrict. California is going to put an initiative on the ballot that almost certainly will pass that will redistrict. I don't know if North Carolina is able to redistrict supermajorities of the Republicans in both houses. I don't know if there's any more juice to be squeezed out of that one. But what do you think generally of the redistricting wars that are breaking out?
I think the redistricting wars are honestly unfortunate, because I think what it does for the American people is it highlights that this is just highly politicized, right? For no other reason. We're not on the back end of a census here where we need to take a look at actually shifting all of these different lines. The politics of all this has just broken out into the open. And I think that's a very unfortunate development for the country, because now we're just going to go back and forth with kind of this win at all costs mentality. And that's always a very dangerous thing when we let our politics get to that point. And we know what the stakes are, right? The stakes are incredibly high. I mean, if we lose the House of Representatives in 2026, President Trump is not only going to be a lame duck, he's going to get impeached. And so, it's become incredibly high stakes. It's become way too politicized. I think that's unfortunate for the American people and our culture at large.
Which is, you're a soldier and you're a special forces soldier. I've been talking to political analysts today, Josh Holmes, David Drucker, Rich Lowry, Byron York. We're all resigned to it. It's going to happen. And I just want the Republicans to play as hardball as the Democrats do. And then I want the census to be done right. We'll see what turns out. Congressman, now tell me about the Personnel Subcommittee and the Readiness Subcommittees. I see you're on both of those. It makes sense. Are you satisfied with Secretary Hegseth's efforts to get recruitment up and get personnel ready to serve and in the ranks?
I think he's off to a good start. The last conversation that I had with him is that we need to do more of what he started out to accomplish. And I think 100% we're seeing that play out through the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force in the different constituent services underneath the Department of Defense. But we have a lot more work to do. I've been spending a ton of time with Secretary Dan Driscoll and Chief Randy George of the Army. Through Army Transformation Initiative, we have to completely redesign the assets that our Army is purchasing. And we also have to redesign the force structures that we're utilizing and the contracting mechanisms that we are utilizing to procure future assets. We become way too good at procuring yesterday's technology with tomorrow's dollars. We're fixing that right now, but it's really going to take a couple years to fix. And then once we fix it in the Army, we need to iterate it across the Air Force and the Navy. And by the time President Trump leaves office, we genuinely should have a military that we can tell the American people is capable of achieving peace through strength.
One of the interesting parts of being a congressman is that you make appointments to the military academies. You are, our audience should know, you are a West Point graduate, so you know very well the sort of people you want to take into the academy. How are you approaching the appointment process, Congressman? It's different for every 435 members. They all have different approaches. What's yours?
Well, I'm very passionate about it, as you might conclude based on my background, but I genuinely believe that our service academies, and I'm preferential to West Point, but I love all of our service academies because they are educating, training, and inspiring the next generation of American leaders that are going to make history in their own way, in their own time. And so we've got to take this very seriously. I've developed a network of academy graduates and military personnel that are non-commissioned officers, very senior enlisted, that know and understand what type of caliber of leader they're looking for in the future set of leaders that we're going to produce in this country. And we're all working together to intake all of the applications that we have, screen them, interview the candidates, and then make the best possible decisions that we can on behalf of our district and ultimately on behalf of the future of our country. That's a process that we take very seriously.
You know, for a long time, my wife, the fetching Mrs. Hewitt, served on the Naval Academy Intake Subcommittee for congressmen out in California. She's always astonished by the quality of the kids, but it's California. It's a lot of people. Are you similarly impressed with the quality of the applicants? And because assure me that we're maintaining the standard.
Hugh, as someone who sits on the Board of Visitors for the Academy, we just had our first Board of Visitors meeting a couple weeks ago. It was up at West Point with the superintendent and with both President Trump's appointees as well as the other appointees from Speaker Johnson, the legislature. And I'll tell you, I am nothing but impressed by the current crop of cadets that are coming out of West Point. I was so encouraged by this because, you know, we see all the negative stories that are out there. I'll tell you what, I'd have a hard time keeping pace with the kids that are coming out today with both their quality and their character. I'm incredibly encouraged for the future of the nation. We've got to make sure that we keep that tempo and that momentum moving in that direction.
Congressman Harrigan, I did not know you had been appointed to the Board of Visitors. Would you explain to the audience what that does? Incredibly important boards. These matter at every one of the academies, but I didn't know you were on it. So tell people what your job is and how you do it.
The Board of Visitors is effectively like a board of directors for the institution. And so we take in both executive branch perspective, but from us, we're obviously from the legislative branch. We come in, we have great continuity, great relationships with the leadership, connected from the academy and the institution through the Association of Graduates, very tied in with Department of Defense, both the Secretary of the Army and Secretary Hegseth, and just keep everything on the rails, right? We want to keep these institutions producing the highest quality leaders of character in the world. And that's our charter. That's what we are doing. That's what we're going to continue to do.
Last question, Congressman. A lot of Republicans are going home for district meetings and town halls. They're being ambushed by Democrat setup. I don't think you would be particularly surprised or in any way intimidated by a hostile group of activists. But has that happened to you in the 10th Congressional District? And how goes the 10th Congressional District?
Well, Hugh, we're doing great out here in the 10th Congressional District, and I'm not exactly the guy that you want to ambush. It's not going to work out well. But no, we've had some great discussions across the 10th. I mean, just today, we actually had a pretty sizable meeting with industry up in Winston-Salem, moved over to have a roundtable with farmers out in Yadkin County, and then ultimately toured a mining facility kind of in the middle of our district, and now are out here with you in between a couple other constituent meetings that we've had throughout the day. We're busy, we're at work. This is really where we get our work done. And whether Republican, Democrat, what have you, the only thing that I'm really dedicated to is telling the truth and making sure that the news of the One Big Beautiful Bill and all of the incredible policies that we delivered for the American people aren't being lied about, right? Because that's happening all across the country. We're correcting that record as we see it, but really enjoy the time to be home right now.
You know, my son's father-in-law and mother-in-law live in Winston-Salem. I didn't know you represented Winston-Salem. That place is booming. That place is hot. I think he's retiring this year from the local community college, but it's a very vibrant district. Is its demographic mix, Republican D, changing much, or is it getting redder?
It's still pretty Democratic, but look, North Carolina is an absolutely incredible place to live. It is growing. It's the third fastest growing state in the nation. It is the #1 state in the country to do business. And that's because we believe in limited government, we believe in low taxes, and we are doing everything that we possibly can to set the conditions for businesses and the American middle class to be successful. Come on out to
Far
North
be
Carolina.
it from me. I don't want to argue with the Special Forces veteran, but Ohio's the best place to do business. You can have #2, though, Congressman. Just want to make sure the record is straight. Pat Harrigan, keep coming back. I love talking to freshman congressmen because everything is new and they have the enthusiasm that the institution needs. Congressman Pat Harrigan, thank you. Earlier today, I sat down with the great one, Mark Levin, to talk about his brand new book on power. Here's part 3 of that interview. As you say on page 146, the entire Marxist project is an evil fiction. That's terse. It's on point. And I found myself, as I went through on power, you're really writing a repudiation of Marx. And I began to wonder what happened between the blessing of the Enlightenment that framed our Constitution. By the time Marx dies, he has let loose a virus on the world, Marxism, which continues to thrive and spread every day, especially in America. What happened in that period of time, Mark? Because you say he's around for the beginning of the second industrial revolution, but he didn't see the wealth, the abundance it would produce. He did not live to see his own ideas repudiated. But what hatched him? What broke him?
First of all, people need to understand a country like ours, there's only been one in the whole history of mankind. And Athens is gone, and Rome's gone, and the British Empire is gone. So one of the things I point out in the book is this trajectory is always towards negative power. You'll have at a time like the birth of the United States of America, how unbelievably fantastic that is. That's sort of the counter-revolution. But then when you look at the trajectory of free countries, it's not good. They don't survive. Evil always survives. And this is what I tell people who say, well, what about forever wars? I said, open your Bible. It's not that we want stupid wars. That's stupid. It's not that we want to intervene where we don't belong. That's stupid too. But this battle between good and evil is forever. That's why you go to church, to deal with it. You go to synagogue to deal with it. That's why you believe in a faith. If everything were positive and perfect, there would be no faith. There'd be no belief systems. So these things are forever. These battles are forever. It's not that Marx came along. You know, Rousseau, he stole from Rousseau. He stole from Hegel. Especially Hegel. Hegel's the bigger problem, but people don't realize it. Marx took it and applied it to economics. He said everything comes down to materialism. Everything comes down to economics. Well, he was wrong about that. He died, I think it was 1873, the Second Industrial Revolution, which is the real Industrial Revolution. It began in about 1870. He didn't know what capitalism, a word he invented, would create. What did it create? It created the opposite of what he said. The greatest middle class in human history. That's what the Industrial Revolution created. People could talk about robber barons all they want. The left does this all the time. He created, that is, capitalism created for the vast majority of people, the masses, a lifestyle that's better than any king or queen lived 150 years ago. Better than any king or queen. I say this all. Walk into a supermarket. Look what you have. I don't care if you're a plumber, electrician, a janitor, the best surgeon in the world, you go in there, that's available to anybody. You may not like the price, but look at the availability. So many different types of hamburger meat. You want 85% fat, 90% fat, 50 different types of bread, 14 different types of eggs, milk, on and on and on. You can get prescription drugs. People may complain about prices, but let me tell you something, folks. There's not another group of human beings ever who've had life so good as they do now. And it's so ubiquitous in a society.
Oh, yeah. I loved it's on page 145. People need to read Mark Levin talking about the neighborhood supermarket. Not unlike the essay on the pencil, but you're right. The neighborhood supermarket is a testament to the grand, extraordinary production of good things, not goods, but good things. The neighborhood supermarket is the best example of what Western capitalism and liberty can do with positive power. Mark, I want to get 2 more things down before we run out of time. I got to do an entire show in a half an hour, so I want to make sure I cover this. First of all, I am very glad to see C.S. Lewis in your book, not once, but a few times. And in fact, you quote one of my favorite collections of his essays, God in the Dock, when you write, of all tyrannies, a tyranny exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It may be better to live under robber barons, Lewis writes, and you quote, than under the omnipotent moral busybodies. And I thought, and you mentioned, homeowners associations. They are, in fact, the little platoons of negative power. They are the worst little busybodies in the world, and they're a shadow, sort of a forerunner of what happens when you get to big government, when you get to omnipotent government in places like China with its social credit score. Do you think we are headed that way because of the fact we are growing accustomed to people telling us what to do with our property, which should be verboten? It's in the Fifth Amendment. They should not be able to tell us, Village of Euclid versus Ambler, worst decision in the history of the Supreme Court. No one should be able to regulate our property. But I don't know how we get out of this jam.
Well, C.S. Lewis was brilliant. He was a brilliant, for many Christians, he's a great philosopher. Well, I'm Jewish, and I think he was a great philosopher. And Montesquieu said the same thing, as did some others. That is, these people who pursue power and the imposition of power and coercion in the name of virtue and self-righteousness are the most dangerous people on the face of the earth, because at least these evil people, we understand where they're coming from. And here's the problem. Lewis was right. Montesquieu was right. They were all right. That's why Mondami is attracting support. Even though he's a communist, an Islamist, and a Jew hater, look what he's promising. He's promising all these wonderful equality and all the rest of it, which, of course, they never deliver on, and they cannot. So your question is, am I concerned about this? Yes. And I want people to read the book. Buy it, great, but read it, because once you understand how power actually comes into play, because it's dealt with very surface level, very superficially in debates that they have at the Federalist Society and other places, or debates we have on TV and on radio and so forth, and so liberty, okay, great. But if you don't have power, and if power is not exercised properly, none of the rest of it follows. Faith, you can't practice your faith openly. Of course, you can in secret, in the basement, but you can't exercise your liberty, your private property rights, all these other things. There have been great Supreme Court rulings in the past couple of years, as you know, great actions by the President of the United States, as you know.
Yep.
Exactly. But the problem is the culture in society. That's where the action is. And so that's why, look, why do I write books? I don't have to write books. I don't need to write books unless I'm trying to get people to read and learn something that they're not taught in school, that they're not taught in the media, and they're not taught in the other books. And so my view is I have complete faith in the American people once the American people are awakened to certain things that are being done to them because they're busy. And so my view is there are tens of millions of us, Hugh. If we talk to each other, if we talk to our families and friends at the dinner table, in church or synagogue or wherever we are, we have more power than any network, any collection of networks. We have more power if we awaken to these facts, we figure out what's taking place. And in this case, I've decided if we argue at a different level now, we can talk about liberty and rights, and we can talk about capitalism versus socialism, but let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Do you want to be a sovereign human being, or do you want to be enslaved to clever demagogues?
That's it.
What it comes down to.
That's it. And that is where we're going to take a break. I'll finish the interview with Mark Levin in the next segment. Don't go anywhere. The Great One will be back. You can go to Amazon and get his book on power. You'll enjoy it. You'll learn a lot. And you might want to get some copies for the local high school library and maybe for the smartest civics teachers that you know. In fact, for every teacher that you know. If you go to jameslilacs.substack.com, oh, he's not next. Oh, this is still Mark Levin. That's why we're talking to him during the break, setting up the shot. Let's go to the end of the Mark Levin interview. And my idea, when I finished on power, I'm talking with the president of Chapman about maybe doing a seminar for freshmen on curiosity. I think you could take On Power and spend an entire year. You can read it in 2 days. I want the audience to understand. It's very easy to read. It's very wonderful to read, and it's powerful. But if you went through and you stopped at every name you had not yet encountered, Cicero, Montesquieu, Locke, and you did a little deep dive into each of those people, it would be an education that we have not been providing that was routine in my educational years. I mean, you had to, I didn't get out of high school without knowing who these people were. I don't know that a high school student could be expected to know half of the people who you reference, and they'll know who Jefferson is, but they won't know Jefferson writing in 1819 a letter on liberty. They'll never find that in their high school textbook. So that's my first suggestion. I want to end, of course, with a disagreement. I'm a Hamiltonian. I like Federalist 78. You do not talk about Federalist 78 in the judicial power, Mark, not because you're afraid of it, it's because it doesn't fit into the book anywhere. But when you go to the Constitution Center, is that what they want you to talk about, the Federalist 78?
Hugh, when you read beyond Federalist 78, in fact, when you get beyond the Federalist, obviously he was one of the main authors of the Federalist, he and Madison, John Jay to a lesser extent. What I say in my book is he that didn't believe everything he was writing, or he reversed course.
You're right.
Because what we know about him was, I explained, I give two examples, pre-Federalist and after Federalist. The Bank of England argument, his arguments were outrageous. And he drove Madison and Jefferson nuts because he's talking about implicit powers. He's talking about necessary and proper. He sounds like Ruth Bader Ginsburg in that stuff. And then before that, at the Constitutional Convention, and it's funny, the National Constitution Center said, we didn't know this. We want to talk to you about this. Jeff Rosen over there. I said, well, it's in there. You just got to dig hard in Madison's notes. I mean, he proposes lifetime senators. He proposed a lifetime president. The rest of the delegates, that went absolutely nowhere. Now, his reason for it was we need to have people who are committed to governance. You know, we can't have people who are dipping into the private sector and into government. We'd have conflicts and all. But everybody knew that was crazy. So,
but in 78, he argues that during good behavior, I want to resurrect this standard for judges. It is not good behavior for district court judges in the United States to set aside settled law to attempt to reverse the executive power. It is not good behavior to repeatedly reject Supreme Court black letter law because your political agenda. It is an impeachable offense. Do you think we ought to resurrect that part of Federalist 78, that lifetime tenure is predicated on good behavior? And by that, we do not mean non-criminal behavior. We mean fidelity to the law.
Well, you know, Jefferson tried that and he failed. And
picked the wrong target.
Supreme Court justices and everybody else keep pointing to that over and over again. I have a better idea because I think that could get messy. I could see the left more effectively going after a Clarence Thomas or a Sam Alito or something like that. Way back in my first book, Men in Black, and the left has kind of stolen this and twisted it. I supported term limits for Supreme Court justices, and I still do. Even though some of our good guys would go down, some of their guys would go down too. But just as a matter of practice. And then I said, if we're not going to do that, in another book I wrote, The Liberty Amendments, I said, okay, then let's do something a little differently here, which is we should at least allow, who says the court should have the last word? Justice Marshall, that's it. That's not in the Constitution.
1803.
That's a whole other area for another day. Yeah, 1803, Marbury versus Mendon. But I make the point in there that that 3/5, my idea, 3/5 of the Senate or the House should be able to hold a Supreme Court decision null and void, because 3/5 would be a fairly good representation of the body politic, or 3/5 of the state legislatures, and they could act within 24 months. Can't let it sit there for, not to rewrite the opinion, not to write an opinion, just thumbs up or thumbs down. It would be hard to get 3/5, but I said, why is it that a 5-4 majority of lawyers on the Supreme Court can determine what is fundamental constitutional law and what is not? To me, that is absurd. And if you switch one justice, then it's 5-4 the other way. So I'm thinking, how do we preserve the independence of the court, but allow the body politic, when it comes down to big issues, to speak out, not through democracy, through representative government and a supermajority of the vote? I put that in the Liberty Amendments as my support.
And if you want to hear my response to that, We are out of time today, but the last couple of minutes of my conversation with Mark are over at my YouTube channel. Just go over there and listen nonstop and share it with your friends. You know, that music means that Lilacs is in the house, as in James Lilacs. Go over to lilacs.com for all things James, or go to jameslilacs.substack.com and you will find the bleed. I did that today, James, and it's 28 years old. I had lost track.
Yes. Yeah, I
28 years.
It's one of the longest running blogs and bleats on the internet. I know. I gave a little bit of a stop there to it when I got a job as a radio guy, but then went right back. So it's been Monday through Friday continuous, for about 26 years.
So, James, yesterday I posted something. I canceled my subscription to The Atlantic yesterday because I wasn't getting any value, and there are better things to buy, like the jameslilacs.substack.com. And I talked about it with a couple of reporters, one of whom is Vic Mattis, who's very funny and whimsical and fun.
Yes.
But he informed me that the Washington Post is down to 90,000 print papers. 90,000.
That's absolutely brutal. When I was living in Washington, D.C., and I sure remember these days as well, the Sunday Post would arrive like a phone book on your doorstep. It was just thick and bursting with ads for department stores, and all the received wisdom of the technocrats of the week was right there for you to take and digest. The style section was fantastic. It was a good paper. Now, we can disagree with some of the positions they may have taken, but it was a solid piece that bound a city together. Same here in Minneapolis. Print declines, and at some point, there's just no money to doing it anymore. And all of those old readers who a demographic that's sliding down into the coffin are going to be mad. But unfortunately, print for newspapers is doomed. But let me tell you something here. I, too, canceled The Atlantic because Apple News Plus allows you a subscription to not only The Atlantic and The New Yorker, but many other newspapers as well. So you don't have to give them your money if you wish. You just subscribe to the Apple News feed and you get all the stories there as well. So I don't know how magazines
I didn't know that.
These days. Yeah.
What do you pay for in media now? That's the question I asked a bunch of people yesterday. What do you pay for? Because I'm down to about a half dozen things. And the only, quote, newspapers are the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times, and they're on thin ice with me.
The Wall Street Journal keeps calling me and saying, will you please come back? And I keep telling them, well, you've been charging me like $7,432 a year. So maybe no. And the product's getting smaller. And I get it on Apple News Plus. The New Yorker I used to subscribe to, big, thick magazine, but I dumped it because of Apple News Plus. When it comes to streaming services, I pay for that for lots of media, and there's news there, although I just seem to be able to get, what's my line every night, and that's the extent of my television viewing. So no, it comes down to that one subscription that I give to Apple, which also covers, games and storage and music and everything else. Apple is the portal through which I now consume entertainment, music, media, and information.
So will the citizenry be better informed or worse informed in another 10 years than they were when the bleed began in 1996?
Let me take a brave stance here, Hugh, and say that the answer is both. And it's both because in the old days, when we had fewer places, when we had the newspaper, we had the evening news, and we had Walter Cronkite telling us that's the way that it is, everybody shared the same set of information, the same set of facts. We could dispute them, but we all had a common group of ideas and knowledge and events around which we grew. Now, there were guardrails placed on that, of course, so nothing really veered outside of it. Now, guardrails are off. Everybody can go on. And as we used to say in the days of the blogs back after 9/11, I mean, the amount of information that we could now get was greater. Signal to noise ratio was different because you had people who were making stuff up. You had liars, you had ideologues. So you have to learn to sort. 10 years from now, there won't be as many informational points that are trusted by everybody. They will have blown their credibility, or they just simply won't be able to make any money. So we're going to have to pull it together from sources disparate that are both something you got to question, but also something that eventually you come to rely on and trust. What I am worried about is how I don't trust any images or any video in 2025 at this point. Unless it was done.
You and me both.
Unless it's water. No, I just simply don't. The number of videos I've been watching on Twitter, and I look at that, and about 30 seconds in, I say, wait a minute. This didn't happen. Somebody made this up on Grok or on ChatGPT or OpenAI and threw it on the internet, and are people going to fall for it? A lot of people are, and I don't know what we're going to do about that. I really don't.
I want to. Do you think there's a space in the business world to just verify, just a V, verify it actually happened? Because I have the same problem. I see videos after the Putin-Trump meeting. I don't know if they're real.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that one where the V2 crashes in flames. Is that real? No. Yes, there is a space for it. But the problem is we had with PolitiFact and Truth Meter and the rest of these, that you start to wonder exactly who is verifying the verifiers. And then you become a little bit suspicious about what they don't and do not judge. I would like to see, it's entirely possible we'll have to trust a supercomputer running its own AI to tell us whether or not robots made the thing that we're watching. Every time I log on the internet to my site, I've got to prove to them that I'm not the robot. When they're the robot, you seem to be running everything.
How many times do you flunk?
You prove to me. Here's a picture. You count the number of bicycles in that damned picture.
How often do you flunk that? I don't think I ever get past the count the bridges one. I miss a bridge every time.
I flunk it because if it's buses or something, there'll be the last 6 inches of a bus hanging in one of those pictures there, and I don't click it, and I get dinged for that. And then a robot tells me that I must be a robot. Well, you would know, wouldn't you? So yes, I mean, it's going forward. The last 20 years is the destruction of the mainstream media, the decline of the trusted voices. There's still a core audience that they have, but we got to get used to being a lot smarter on our own half to see what is and is not real and what is and is not true. And it's hard, but better an engaged citizenry that actually is involved in that than somebody who just sort of passively lets the cathode ray stream into their face like they did in 1967.
Well, do you trust? Now, I trust news items so much that I invested a little bit of money in it, because John Ellis is their editor-in-chief. He's a newsman. Do you trust Apple News Plus?
Well, Apple News it's only an aggregator. So it's giving me the New Yorker, it's giving me Atlantic, it's giving me the Minnesota Star Tribune, it's giving me the Wall Street Journal, it's giving me all the papers that have partnered with them. So it's just a doorway into a room with things that I can take off the shelf. Do they have original content themselves? They have some podcasts and the like that go off the news, and they're basically pretty good, pretty solid. But the whole trust but verify thing that, like the man said, is a good watchword for the entire internet. Except for my.
Well, you have intrigued me.
Everything.
I'm going to have to go.
Yeah.
What is the cost of Apple News Plus?
I think it's about $40 for the whole thing, but you get the storage space, you get Apple TV, you get Apple Music. I mean, like I said, you get wrapped into their own little ecosystem, and all things come to you.
We'll have to discuss this again next week. JamesLilacs.substack.com. Support the bleak. JamesLilacs.substack.com. I think I'm going to like Pope Leo a lot. I just was reading during the break that Pope Leo the 14th sent a letter to the Amazon bishops who are meeting that, bottom line, nature is not to be worshipped, but exists to praise God. It's quite the thing on Catholic Twitter right now. Pope Leo is trending, and whenever that happens, I go to find out what's going on, and he's making a good first 100 days, doing a good job. Relief Factor does a great job. I remind you about it every hour, so I want to make sure I do this hour. I took it in the first hour. I take it every day in the first hour. It's the only supplement I've taken for more than 20 years. I mean, I just don't do the supplement thing. But I investigated and learned about Relief Factor when it came out. They were looking for sponsors. I was one of the first ones in. I said, I'll do that because I can't take NSAIDs. And so let's see if it works. And it works. If you've listened to the program for the 25 years I've been on, I'm always out there trundling. I used to be fast, now I'm slow. But you still get sore no matter what your speed is. And occasionally I will lift weights, very, very little bit that, and being encouraged to do more as I get older. But I want to tell you, Relief Factor really does get rid of the minor aches and pains that come with exercise and aging. So you really ought to give it a try. You can call 1-800, the number 4 and the word relief, 1-800-4-RELIEF, or you can go online and find the starter pack there or ask for it on the phone. The starter pack is $19.95 for a 3-week trial supply, 3 a day for the first week, 2 a day for the second week, 1 a day thereafter. So I only take it 1 a day unless I've got some kind of an unusual muscle strain or something like that. I survived the grandkids on 1 a day, so I'm fine. I must have picked up 1,000 million pounds in the last 3 weeks, but I'm fine because of Relief Factor. Give it a try, 1-800-4, the word relief, or go to relieffactor.com. Some of you are asking about the last 2 minutes of the Mark Levin interview. It's chit-chat between old friends and colleagues. It's over at the YouTube channel, Hugh Hewitt and YouTube. I didn't get a chance to discuss with him Ricardo in Miami. Our mutual friend Ricardo in Miami was a mentor to both of us before he succumbed to the dark side and began to take people's money on golf courses and run a Cuban hot dog stand and driving range in Miami. And everyone who's in Miami knows Ricardo's Cuban hot dog and driving range. And he's the guy that really, I had met Mark before I met Dick, as we used to call him. We now call him Ricardo in Miami. But he was the biggest booster of Mark Levin I've ever known. And he told me, this guy is brilliant. And I'd already worked with Mark, and I knew he was brilliant, but I didn't know he was that brilliant. Back before Mark became world famous authority on everything, which he is, on the Constitution, he was running the Capitol Legal Center. And Dick was out there banging the drum for him. And Ricardo in Miami, you stay retired, but Mark Levin may never retire. You keep taking that money from those people on the tee. And they're unsuspecting, and I think it's a RICO issue. And I'm going to bring it up with Director Patel whenever he comes on the show. I'm going to tell him all about you. But in the meantime, if you missed any of the Mark Levin article on interview on his brand new book on power, go and listen to it. Watch it on YouTube. It'll be on the podcast tonight, Highly Concentrated Hugh. And then get the book. That's the most important thing, because it's got a very bottom line on it. You got to work to save your freedom. You got to.